Mascot horror is big right now. Thanks to games like Five Nights at Freddy's, it seems everyone's repressed fears about various sorts of mascots has come to the surface in a number of ways, and some of those ways result in new creative projects. Video games are an obvious choice for these projects, and a new game is the subject of today's Talking About video. Indigo Park is the creation of Unique Geese, and I also noticed a few names I recognised from the credits with both Firecats and Squeaks. The first part of the game, Chapter 1, released just over a month ago in May for free. I'd had the game on my wishlist since I'd heard about it a few months prior, and so I got right into the game to play and explore, and my recording software didn't record a single bit of visual. After some time to let that disappointment cool, and after some patches to resolve a few issues and change the game over screen for being caught, I waded back into the game and played through twice more to see what new things I could notice having played through once, and I've noticed a few things. Needless to say, this won't be a full theory video. There's not enough information yet for me to feel comfortable making a guess on what happened to cause the title at Indigo Park to suddenly close, how the mascots came to be, or even what the deal is with the AI Rambly. There are, however, enough interesting little details that I feel comfortable making a video on those details and seeing if I can forge some looser, smaller theories on what might be going on in the background, and maybe what Indigo as a company might be like. But they will be very speculative. I'm also going to be referring to the AI as Rambly AI to differentiate him from the character of Rambly, because I feel like the character of Rambly is different from the AI that's been programmed with Rambly's appearance and personality. Also, there's a chance we might meet a giant living mascot version of Rambly in a later chapter, but the AI has enough personality and sentience to deserve a name too. As always, there's a standard warning for horror game content coming up. Indigo Park isn't too scary, at least during this first chapter, but there is a little implied blood and one section that is gory. So if that's not your bag, you may wish to avoid those parts of the videos when I warn you on screen of them. Also, if you've not played through the game yet or watched someone else playing through it and don't wish to be spoiled, well, you should probably take that off your list before watching this video. But please do come back, I like to share my theories with you. And if you're looking for a gameplay video to watch, might I recommend my own, which I have just uploaded the cutdown version of. Shameless plug there. But with all that said and set out, let's get into it. Let's start first with establishing some known facts, or things presented to us as fact, we see during the game. Starting off with the timeline, we see at the start of the game during the opening cinematic that the paper reporting on Indigo Park's evacuation is dated October 22, 2015. Later on, when we first meet Rambly AI, he notes that it's been 2,920 days, 4 hours, 23 minutes and 38 seconds since someone last visited the park, with 2,920 days coming to exactly 8 years. This places Indigo Park in October of 2023, with the date itself being visible shortly after when we hop onto the registration computer and see a window that tells us it's Saturday, October 7th, setting the game on the day of October 7th, 2023, which also means that Indigo Park likely closed during the first week of October in 2015, as Rambly AI probably last saw someone in the park as staff locked up the park after the incident that caused the evacuation, if both incidences didn't take place on the same day of October 7th. We can further hazard a guess at what time of day Rambly AI last saw someone too, as dashcam footage of a car driving into a Rambler entrance is part of the opening cinematic too, and the time on that is 21:48, as well as also confirming the date, which matches with the darkness outside. If we suppose that the player is going into the park shortly after this dashcam footage is taken, maybe around 10 or 11 PM, then Indigo Park was probably locked up around 6 or 7 PM on October 7th, 2015. Next, we move on to what we learn about Indigo itself. Indigo seems to be the name of the company behind Indigo Park, and from the black and white footage we see of the park's opening at the very beginning, the company has been around for a while. This is confirmed through the description of the retro Lloyd plush collectible we find during the game, which talks about the classic Indigo cartoons, which suggests maybe Indigo is like Disney and cartoons are, or were, their main product. However, the same description also talks about how they don't think the plush, which is made to look like a 1920s rubber hose style cartoon, is accurate to how Lloyd might have appeared in said older cartoons. While this doesn't disprove that Indigo started making cartoons in that time period, it could point to Indigo getting their start a bit later. As of yet, it's unknown with what information we've been presented with so far in game, although checking the Indigo Park wiki does give birthdays for Molly, Finley and Lloyd as 1963, 1966 and 1972 respectively. However, we do learn of 5 different funny animal characters while in the park. Molly McCaw, a female macaw pilot who builds, and then crashes, her planes. Finley the sea serpent, who personality-wise seems similar to Eeyore and loves to collect seashells. Lloydford L. Lion, the stage performer, often shortened to just Lloyd. Rambly the raccoon, the face of both Indigo and the park's AI. And finally, a skunk character by the name of Salem, who seems to play the antagonist role in the cast, and who uses potions and other tricks to cause trouble. Of these characters, we don't learn an awful lot more than what we get from their segments on Rambly's Railroad, and Salem's section of that is broken enough to get entirely skipped over. Most of what we get beyond that is gleaned from the mouth of Rambly AI himself, and he speaks as the Rambly character would, as well as being a little glitchy right now. Therefore, all his information is talking about the characters instead of their possible histories with Indigo in reality. We do learn a little bit though, mostly in relation to the player. Molly was said to be the favourite of the player's mother, with them being among the first in line for a new meet and greet the parks introduced, and Lloyd was one of the player's favourites. The player also feels that Lloyd was used a lot more as a character when they were a kid, and we do indeed see a few things that support this, but we'll cover that a bit later. We also learn through a voice recording Rambly AI plays upon being shown the Rambly costume head that Indigo Park did at one point have costume performers, but that they were probably replaced by the new mascots that we encounter in park, actual living beings that resemble the animal characters, and we know they must be flesh and blood because Molly bleeds a lot when she loses her head. Rambly AI also notes that he's never seen anyone wearing one before, although whether that refers to all the costumes or just the Rambly one is unclear, so it was likely he was brought online after the time of costumed performers. We also learn a little bit about our protagonist in the opening, with a chat log that names them as Ed, suggesting that our player is what is known as an urban explorer. For those unfamiliar, an urban explorer is defined by the Cambridge Dictionary as a person who enjoys spending time in towns and cities, going into buildings and places that are hidden or no longer used, and that may not usually be open to the public or legal to visit. Sometimes they will even film their expeditions and upload it for others to see. While not technically illegal everywhere, these people are often skirting the edge of the law by going onto property they might not have permission to be on. This is why we see the dashcam footage entering into first an area that is signposted to not be a park entrance and is surrounded by do not enter signs, then the Wrangler's entrance to the park late at night. Our player is sneaking into Indigo Park without the permission or prior knowledge of the people who own the park or land, and it seems the only person who does know that they are there is the friend in the chat log who refuses to go with them this time. By the sounds of it, these two have done this sort of thing before, and the friend even says if our player can get in, they'll go with them next time to record something. However, below the chat log we can also see an open text document with a list of points, questions that are being asked. It seems that beyond a simple urban explorer, our character might have come to Indigo Park to investigate why the park closed in the first place, which is also somewhat supported by the fact that the bedroom in said opening has a bunch of post-it notes stuck to posters, etc. We do also learn a few things about their past with the park in the little bits of information they attach to the collectibles, with Lloyd being one of their favourites as mentioned before, and Finley scaring them even though they enjoyed fish and aquariums. They do also refer to Rambly as Buddy in the description for the Rambly plush, although whether this is just quoting Rambly AI's speech, as they do refer to the character as Buddy, is unknown. The lack of quote marks suggests that this is coming from the player's point of view, however, and is likely about Rambly AI. They also remember wanting the Rambly ears, and their dad saying they would get some for them, with it maybe being hinted at that the promised ears were never received, and loving the free unlimited refills that the Rambly Cup gave to them. They also seem to enjoy Bird Up Soda, with them having drunk so much at the park once that they threw up on rooftop races, and a can of it being visible on the desk during the opening cinematic. We also get told that Oceanic Odyssey, Finley's special attraction at the park, is closed for repairs during Rambley's Railroad. This sort of matches up with a post-it note we see stuck to a poster for said attraction back in the intro cinematic, which reads replaced, which suggests that maybe there was speculation about Finley's attraction being taken out and replaced with something new. But that's my own speculation about a few of the details we see. Speaking of which, it's time to go outside of what's confirmed to us and begin to start making some guesses. As the game has only had its first chapter out, we've not had much time to explore the park yet. Therefore, a lot of story elements are more hinted at than presented to us clearly right now. Going back to the descriptions of the collectibles we find during the chapter, there are a number of small hints that as a company Indigo is sometimes not above board. The best example of this, I think, is the Golden Rambley plush. The player themselves calls Indigo lazy and money hungry for simply recolouring a character and calling it new, which I feel might be a slight take that at FNAF 2. And when giving information about it, Rambley AI literally says that the limited edition Golden Rambley plushies were just regular plushies blasted with golden spray paint. Another example is through the presentation of the action figure, with the advert made to sound as if the toy is more awesome than it actually is without actually lying. See the unlimited edition part at the start, which when heard in passing could be mistaken for limited edition, and the sole advertised action the figure has being contrasted with the toy just not doing anything. We could also take from the description of the Rambley Cup that Indigo might have stopped doing the free unlimited refills the player describes based on the phrase used to, although that could just be part of the reminiscing the player is doing. Rambley AI also seems programmed to be very enthusiastic about anything Indigo, and when presented with a non-Indigo plush toy, which is a reference to another fan game, Percy's Playtime, is very dismissive of it while still keeping his positive voice on. This is, of course, what you'd expect from the AI Indigo programmed, which does make his comments about things like the action figure and the Rambley ears flying off shelves feel a little suspect. But then we also have nothing to disprove what Rambley AI says about Indigo's current popularity right now. The only other persons we have to compare Rambley AI's statements to are the player, who is a clear Indigo fan, and their friend whose only comment on Indigo was forgetting about the old park. So I don't think we can say much on Indigo's popularity or state in the game's 2023, but the kind of bird up we see on the desk in the opening does at least suggest that they might still be in business, just that Indigo Park itself was closed. This is further supported by the description of the Rambley plush saying that the raccoon is the main man of the whole empire that is Indigo. There was also a reference to parked in the description for the Molly plush, which might suggest that there's more than one Indigo Park out there, but likely refers to the different sections of the park we're in. Comments Rambley AI and the player make on things like the action figure, mint condition, and the Rambley ears, yard sale, make me think that these products at least are no longer available in the present day. However, I do think that there is a hint to how the living mascots were treated by Indigo in Molly's voice lines. Molly is able to imitate things she hears. We found this out in the game over screen when she catches you. A lot of what she says as she is chasing you or after catching you are either lines taken from Rambley's Railroad, which can be seen stalking you through, or lines possibly taken from a Molly-themed attraction or things she might have been trained to say in character. However, there are a few quotes from when she catches you that suggest that whoever dealt with the mascots wasn't very kind about it.
Get up, you stupid freak. Get back in your cage, bird.
It also seems like the introduction of the new mascots wasn't the cause of the evacuation, at least not immediately. While there is a mention of a new Molly meet and greet that doesn't necessarily suggest that the giant living macaw was the star of that attraction, there are two voice clips that Molly says during the chase that sound like they were from park guests.
I want to play with the birdie! Don't touch that thing, son.
As Molly is said to be able to imitate what she hears, it seems obvious that these two lines are things she overheard guests of the park saying. One being a child who wanted to get closer to Molly, and the other a concerned parent trying to move their child away from her. This suggests that the mascots did interact with the parkgoers, at least briefly, although for how long is not clear yet. But it also sounds like the older parkgoers might have been less comfortable with the giant living mascot creatures than their children were. And honestly, given what we see of Molly, Lloyd and briefly Finley, I can't really blame the parents. I especially find Lloyd's proportions to be a bit off, and the models for each character shows that they are covered in patches of what looks to be blood, alongside both Lloyd's paws and Molly's beak seemingly covered in fresh blood too. My question is, whose blood? The most logical answer right now is that they've somehow been fighting with each other, which would explain both the paws and beak, as well as the patches that cover their bodies. But who managed to attack Finley underwater in that case? The other possibility that springs to mind is that something about the process used to create these characters causes hurt to them, which either results in the bleeding itself, or causes them to pick at their own bodies and cause the bleeding, which again might explain both the bloodied paws and beak. Another of Molly's quotes is, "It barely hurts at all," which can be heard in both a more manic tone during the chase,
It barely hurts at all!
as well as a more somber one if caught by her.
It barely hurts at all.
While this is a quote of one of Molly's lines from the Rambly Railroad ride, could the more somber version be a hint towards the possibility of the mascots themselves being in pain, tearing at their own flesh in any attempt to make it stop? We also know that Rambly AI hasn't seen the state any of the living mascots are in by the time of the game, as the game manages to keep any occurrence of them out of his sight until the end of the chapter. He knows he can't see behind the stage where Lloyd lurks, seems to miss all the times Molly lurks out of sight, stalking us through both the railroad and main stage, which you too can miss if you don't look the right way, and he loses sight of us in Molly's landing pad until near the end of the chase, after which he most certainly does notice Molly, and grants the player staff status to allow them to escape her in a staff-only area. This is because, as he tells us shortly after we have escaped, he has been confined to the main entrance for a long time, and thus has had no idea what's happened to and in the rest of the park during those, supposedly, 8 years. And I'm currently under the suspicion that his isolation was purposeful. We find Rambly AI waiting for visitors in the side office near the gate, and we have to fix a generator to even get the gate open. We then later have to fix another generator to get the Rambly Railroad ride going again after it breaks down. My working theory is that Rambly AI was contained to the entrance computers, and the connections further into the park were cut off from him. They then put in 2 measures to make sure Rambly AI wouldn't just be able to jump between screens nearby by taking gears out of both the gate generator to shut him outside Indigo Park, and then further by making it so that he couldn't make it through Rambly's railroad by removing gears from another generator halfway along. I feel that the conductor Rambly we see in the train car in the front is actually Rambly AI, as before we get onto that ride, none of Rambly AI's glitches show any conductor frames, but many of the glitches we see after the ride do show these frames. In fact, the first conductor frames we see are in the queue line for the railroad, through monitors that would have originally probably been used for the pre-show, a very likely place for Conductor Rambly to have shown up. Not that I don't think Conductor Rambly doesn't exist, I just think that this is Rambly AI sort of merging with them. This suggests that Rambly AI is riding with us on the ride, and might have picked up some residual data or information along the journey to bypass the blocks that have been put in his way. Although it is probably true that he truly does want to give the player a fun time at Indigo Park, I also feel like he needed the player to get back inside and possibly get them into a place where they would be willing to help him restore the park or accomplish whatever goal he has. After all, as he tells us, he needs a human user for authorization of some things in his databanks. However, I'm not entirely sure why Rambly AI was confined to the front gate at this time. While the possibility exists that he is somehow evil or malicious, I'm not sure I really buy it. Rambly AI proves again and again to be a terrible liar when he's trying to sell things being wrong with the park as part of the experience. A good example of this is during your time on the registration computer when he tells you it is Rambly Tuesday, while a big pop-up is visible on the opposite screen telling us that it is in fact Saturday. Also, catch his movements and tone of voice while making up an experienced name for getting the gate's power generator going again. Of course, this doesn't prove he's not still lying to us or even telling us what he perceives the truth to be. But speaking outside of speculations and theories for a moment, I think honestly I just don't want him to be the bad guy, personally. There always exists the possibility that Rambly AI was confined to the gate to protect him, or to maybe act as a key to allow someone else to discover something inside the park. We just don't know yet. The final larger thing I'd like to speculate on is something I mentioned earlier, Lloyd's earlier prominence in the park compared to the present day. Looking closely around the park does give a few hints that Lloyd used to be pushed a lot more than he currently is. The very first thing we can notice upon game start is that if you look carefully in the black and white footage for the opening of Indigo Park, you can see that Molly is pictured on the left side of the gate, while Lloyd is on the right. However, when we arrive at the park in the present, Molly's picture is still there, albeit slightly destroyed, but Lloyd's image has been replaced with that of Rambly. That being said, we can find Lloyd's image on a wall inside of the gate in the entryway to the park, but it is true that it is no longer as prominent as it was before. We can also discover a number of unused elements in the back of Rambly's railroad when we go to fix the generator to get it going again. Among them an animatronic Molly buried in rubble, what looks to be a statue of Finley, and behind Finley is a sign for Lloyd's Limos, which we can make a fairly good guess at being the name of a prior ride or other attraction that seems to no longer exist. Given its location, we can also guess it might once have occupied the area the railroad now exists in. It's also possible to find signs for the same attraction stashed out of sight behind some shelves in the backstage area of the main stage, as well as a golden statue of Lloyd that resembles the one seen prior with the statues of Rambly, and who we can assume might be Isaac Indigo from the park's opening footage, if not someone else. Combined with an image of Lloyd handing over a deed to Rambly we can find, there is enough evidence to point to Rambly maybe replacing Lloyd as a main mascot. The massive amount of Rambly merchandise we find compared to the other mascots does suggest that the raccoon was being pushed heavily around the time the park was evacuated, and even the recording linked to the costume mentions that the raccoon costume had only just recently been acquired when the living mascots came in. Everything certainly points to Rambly being a newer addition to the cast of characters, maybe in a bid to attract a new generation of customers with his more cute, child-friendly design, compared to Lloyd, who has more of a suave and adult design. However, out of all the cast, it is Lloyd who has the throwback plushie, something Rambly AI is obviously not pleased about when he is shown said plush. This, combined with Rambly AI's obvious displeasure towards Lloyd, and the fact Lloyd can be heard to say he is the real star just as we're exiting his area of the railroad, makes me wonder if the two characters have a rivalry in the Indigo lore, with the two of them now competing for that top spot as Indigo's star character. On character relations between Rambly and the rest, while both Molly and Finley's sections of the railroad have them being kind and friendly to Rambly, it is noticeable that both of them have at least one line where they sound off. Molly's assurance to Rambly that crashing barely hurts at all sounds like she is covering for a lie, and Finley sounds almost annoyed with Rambly when he says that maybe someone should come into his shell instead of him coming out of it. This does make me wonder if their friendships might have issues beneath the surface, demonstrating that they're newer and haven't yet been able to work out all the conflicts they might have. Rambly AI, with his personality as Rambly the character, seems oblivious to any of this though, further cementing his more childlike personality and newer status. There are a few further little details and questions I've noticed during the course of the chapter, but couldn't fit cleanly into what I've already talked about. So let's go over those things here. Firstly, we'll start at the beginning of the game with the opening cinematic. Alongside the things I've already mentioned, we can notice a few extra details. The first of these is a photo that has been pinned to the Molly Rooftop Races poster, a photo of a young boy. We don't actually know who this boy is specifically, nor why his photo has been pinned to the Rooftop Races poster, but there is a chance that this is a photo of our protagonist Ed himself, when he was a young child and attended Indigo Park as a guest. The other interesting thing I noticed, aside from the newspaper that suggests that even by October 22nd people were still waiting for an explanation behind Indigo Park's evacuation, is that unless this is a screen capture of the site or archived, it very much seems like Indigo's website for booking trips to the park is still very much live. This could mean, as I said earlier, that Indigo does have more than one theme park out there. Or possibly even that they want to find a way to reopen Indigo Park eventually. Next we come to the point where Rambly AI is attempting to register the player on the computer, and he mentions not having their face in his guest list. We know for certain that the player visited Indigo Park when he was younger, so his comments about it maybe being the player's first time cannot be true. It is very possible that Ed's face has changed enough in the 8 years that Rambly AI can't match it with the prior face of his younger self, but it might also suggest that some of Rambly AI's current bugginess is because he is missing access to some of his memory banks, something that could also be supported by him acquiring Conductor Rambly frames after getting to the railroad. We also get to see what looks like frames of his initial opening pitch in most of its glitches as we go through the chapter, so it really does feel like Rambly AI is retaining little bits of information and special frames from each unique section of the park he passes through. Then, just inside the park's gate, we come into the Critter Corner gift shop to collect our Critter Cuff. When I played through the second time, I specifically went looking for Salem merchandise now that I knew of them as a character. The only place you can seem to find any is on the keyring stand near the door, but it wasn't until I went through the third time for the footage you've been seeing on screen that I noticed the other strange thing about the keyring stand. Every other character is on there, except for Rambly, whose supposed row is completely empty all the way down the stand. It seems like a very odd detail because, as I mentioned before, Rambly makes up most of the character merchandise we see and collect in Chapter 1. So why are there no keyrings of him when there are ones of every other animal character we know of, including antagonist Salem? Other than that, there are just a few big questions to ask. What caused the evacuation? How did Indigo manage to get hold of giant living versions of the mascots? Is there a living mascot Rambly or Salem we've yet to see? How did the Rambleberry collectible get out of the arcade cabinet? What is going on with that clock tower in the background? And just what is Rambleberry flavour anyway? For now, we can only wonder, study and guess as to what the answers might be or what we might see next. The ending of Chapter 1 does suggest that we're going to be dealing with Finley as our next main antagonistic force, with his small cameo at the end, but beyond that we could see so much more, maybe even finding out if Oceanic Odyssey really was due to be replaced in the near future. Chapter 2 has recently completed its Kickstarter, so for now, we watch, we wait. We keep our eyes open for what else Indigo Park and his raccoon-shaped AI has to offer to us next. I personally can't wait to see how my guesses match up with what we get presented with next.